Karen's confidence wavered as the neighbor climbed out of his hot tub with deliberate slowness. There was something about his movements, controlled, purposeful, that reminded her of documentaries she'd watched about apex predators. Derek, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, continued his entitled rambling. "Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk here," Derek said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But Mom's right about the rules. Maybe we can work something out. You let me use the hot tub sometimes, and she goes easy on the violations." The neighbor wrapped the towel around his waist and fixed Derek with a stare that would have made a wiser man reconsider his life choices. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want to use my hot tub, and in exchange, your mother won't report me for what exactly?" Karen seized the moment to reclaim control. Noise violations, aesthetic disruption, failure to obtain proper permits. Permits? The man's eyebrows rose. What permits would those be? Hot tub installation requires city approval, engineering assessments, and HOA architectural review. Karen rattled off, her voice gaining strength with each regulation. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks about this." "Have you now?" He walked over to his fence, close enough that Karen could see the amusement dancing in his dark eyes. "And how exactly have you been trying to reach me?" Karen fumbled in her purse, producing a stack of violation notices. "I've left multiple citations on your door, sent certified letters." "Those weren't citations," the man interrupted gently. "Those were HOA violation notices. There's a significant difference." Derek snorted. "Same thing, right?" The silence that followed was so profound that Karen could hear her own heartbeat. The neighbor's expression shifted from amusement to something that made her mouth go dry. "No, son, it's not the same thing at all." Something in his tone made Derek finally shut up. Karen felt the first real flicker of unease as the man continued. "See, citations are issued by law enforcement officers, people with actual authority." He paused, letting that sink in. "HOA violation notices are suggestions, strongly worded suggestions, but suggestions nonetheless. The homeowner's covenant clearly states," Karen began. "The homeowner's covenant," he continued, "is a civil matter. It can lead to fines, liens, even foreclosure in extreme cases. But it's not criminal law." Derek's bravado was cracking. So when you threaten someone with making their life difficult, when you demand access to their property, when you make assumptions about what they should or shouldn't do based on..." He paused, his gaze moving between Derek and Karen. "Well, based on whatever criteria you're using, that can cross some very serious lines." Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She'd never heard anyone speak to her like this, with such calm authority that it made her feel small and foolish. "Who are you?" she whispered. The man smiled again, and this time it was genuinely warm. "I'm Chief Marcus Washington, Oakwood Police Department. I moved in 3 weeks ago." He extended his hand. "I believe you've been trying to get my attention." Derek's face went from red to white so fast Karen thought he might faint. Her own knees felt weak as the implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. You're the police chief?" Derek stammered. 22 years on the force, 5 as chief." Marcus kept his hand extended, waiting. "And you are?" Karen mechanically shook his hand, her mind reeling. "Karen Whitmore, HOO president. This is my son Derek. Pleasure to meet you both." Marcus's grip was firm, but not crushing. "Now, about those permit issues. We..." Karen's usual eloquence deserted her completely. "The hot tub was installed by the previous owner," Marcus explained patiently. "All permits were pulled, all inspections passed. I have the documentation inside if you'd like to review it." Derek made a strangled sound. "We should go." "Actually," Marcus said, his tone still pleasant, but carrying unmistakable authority, "I think we should finish this conversation. You see, I've been meaning to introduce myself to the neighbors, learn about the community I'm now sworn to protect." His eyes found Derek's. "And there are a few things about neighborly behavior that I think we should discuss." Karen Whitmore stood at her kitchen window, steam literally rising from her ears, as she watched her new neighbor lounging in what she considered an obscenely large hot tub. The man was tall, well-built, and had the audacity to be enjoying himself in her neighborhood. She'd been HOA president for 3 years, and this kind of flagrant disregard for property values would not stand. "Mom, are you seriously staring at the neighbor again?" Her son Derek emerged from the basement, controller still in hand, 23 years old and living rent-free in her finished basement. "That ISO needs to go," Karen muttered, adjusting her reading glasses. "I've sent him 3 violation notices, and he's completely ignored them." Derek peered over her shoulder. "The hot tub? Looks pretty sweet, actually. Maybe we should get one." "Absolutely not. Do you know what that monstrosity does to property values? Besides, there are noise ordinances, aesthetic guidelines, and—" "Mom, chill. It's just a hot tub." Derek grabbed a beer from the fridge. "You know what? I'm gonna go talk to him. Maybe he'll let me use it." Karen's eyes widened in horror. "Derek, you will do no such thing. We don't associate with people who flaunt HOA regulations." But Derek was already heading toward the back door, emboldened by liquid courage and 3 years of pent-up frustration at his mother's increasingly militant HOA presidency. Karen watched in growing panic as her son approached the fence separating their properties. "Hey there," Derek called out, his voice carrying the particular brand of confidence that came from never having faced real consequences. "Nice setup you got there, man. Mind if I hop in?" The neighbor looked up from his newspaper, sunglasses reflecting the afternoon sun. He was probably in his 40s, with graying temples and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen everything. "I'm sorry. The hot tub. Looks like there's room for 2. Derek was already pulling off his shirt, revealing a pale chest that hadn't seen sunlight in months. "I'm Derek, by the way. Live next door." Karen burst through her back door like a woman possessed. "Derek, get away from there this instant." The neighbor set down his paper, his expression shifting from mild amusement to something harder to read. "Is there a problem here?" "There most certainly is," Karen announced, marching across her perfectly manicured lawn. "That hot tub violates at least 6 HOA regulations, and I demand it be removed immediately." Derek rolled his eyes. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. He seems cool about sharing." "Sharing?" The neighbor's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Son, you just invited yourself into my hot tub without so much as an introduction. Come on, don't be like that. It's not like you're using all of it." Derek's tone was shifting, taking on the entitled edge that made Karen simultaneously proud and terrified. "Besides, my mom's the HOA president. We could make things really difficult for you if we wanted to." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The neighbor stood slowly, water cascading off his shoulders, and Karen noticed for the first time how commanding his presence was. Even in swim trunks, he looked like someone you didn't want to cross. "Is that a threat?" he asked quietly. Derek puffed out his chest. "Just stating facts, buddy. Maybe you should be more neighborly." Karen felt the situation spiraling beyond her control, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. He's absolutely right. Good neighbors follow the rules. The man studied them both with an expression that made Karen's stomach clench. Then he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well then," he said, reaching for the towel draped over his fence, "I think it's time we had a proper conversation about neighborly behavior. Are you going to go?" Karen stared at the message. "I have to. I'm the president." "Are you going to change things?" The question hung in the air between them. Karen thought about Mrs. Henderson's tears, about the Martinez children who no longer played in their front yard, about all the neighbors who crossed the street to avoid her. She thought about Chief Washington's calm, measured voice as he laid out her pattern of harassment. "I don't know how," she admitted. Derek reached across the table and took her hand. "Maybe that's a start. Admitting you don't know." Thursday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth. Karen stood outside the community center, watching neighbors file in for the monthly HOA meeting. Usually, she arrived early to set up, to review her agenda, to prepare for another session of maintaining order and enforcing standards. Tonight, she lingered outside, uncertain and afraid. Chief Washington arrived 10 minutes before the meeting, nodding politely to Karen as he passed. She noticed several neighbors seemed to gravitate toward him, greeting him with genuine warmth. When was the last time someone had greeted her that way? Inside, the usual dozen residents were scattered across folding chairs, but tonight felt different. There was an energy in the room, a sense of anticipation that made Karen's palms sweat. She took her usual seat at the head table, but for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like she belonged there. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice sounding smaller than usual. "I'd like to welcome Chief Washington to our meeting." Marcus stood and turned to face the assembled neighbors. "Thank you. I wanted to attend tonight because I believe strongly in community involvement. In my experience, the best neighborhoods are ones where people look out for each other, where rules serve the community rather than the other way around." Karen felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Mrs. Henderson was there, looking fragile but determined. The Martinez family had come, their children fidgeting in the back row. Mr. Chen sat with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "I have some concerns about recent HOA enforcement practices," Marcus continued. "And I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what kind of community we want to be." Karen's prepared agenda crumpled in her hands. Everything she'd planned to discuss, new parking restrictions, stricter landscaping requirements, additional architectural guidelines, suddenly seemed not just irrelevant but cruel. "Chief Washington is right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." As she looked around the room at faces she'd intimidated, families she'd targeted, neighbors she'd alienated, Karen realized her story wasn't ending tonight. It was just beginning to change direction. But whether that change would be enough to repair the damage she'd done, whether her community would ever trust her again, remained to be seen. The real test would come in the weeks and months ahead, when the cameras were off and the police chief wasn't watching. For now, all she could do was try to find the words to begin making amends. The question was, would anyone be willing to listen? The next 3 days passed in a blur of whispered conversations and avoided eye contact. Karen found herself unable to concentrate on her usual activities, reviewing violation reports, planning next month's HOA newsletter, scheduling property inspections. Every time she tried to focus on her presidential duties, she heard Chief Washington's voice echoing in her mind, tools of harassment. Derek had barely spoken to her since the confrontation, spending most of his time in his room or out of the house entirely. When he did emerge, he looked at her with something she'd never seen before, disappointment mixed with shame. "Mom, we need to talk," he said Wednesday evening, finding her sitting at the kitchen table with an untouched cup of coffee. Karen looked up, startled. "About what?" "About everything." Derek slumped into the chair across from her. "I've been thinking about what the chief said, about the Hendersons, the Martinez family, all those other people." "Derek, you don't understand." "No, Mom. I think I'm finally starting to understand." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she recognized as his way of processing difficult emotions. "I've been living in this house for 3 years, and I never really paid attention to what you were doing. But now..." Karen felt defensive walls rising. "I was protecting our neighborhood. You were bullying people," Derek said quietly. "And I was helping you do it just by going along with it. By thinking I was entitled to whatever I wanted because you were the HOA president." The words stung, because they carried the ring of truth. Karen stared at her reflection in the dark window, seeing a woman she barely recognized. When had she become this person? When had protecting property values become more important than protecting people? "I thought I was doing the right thing," she whispered. "Maybe you started that way," Derek said, his voice gentler now. "But somewhere along the line, it became about control, about making people afraid of you." Karen's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her stomach drop. "The HOA meeting is tomorrow night." Karen felt her world tilting as Chief Washington's words sank in. 22 years of marriage to a man who worked in municipal planning had taught her exactly how much power a police chief wielded in a small town like Oakwood. Her carefully constructed authority as HOA president suddenly felt as substantial as tissue paper. "Derek," she said sharply, we should go inside. But Derek seemed frozen. His earlier bravado completely evaporated. I didn't know. I mean, I was just being friendly about the hot tub, were you? Marcus asked mildly. Because from where I was sitting, it sounded more like you were making demands backed by implied threats. That's not what happened, Karen interjected, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. We were simply discussing property standards. Mrs. Whitmore, Marcus interrupted, his tone still conversational, but carrying an edge that made Karen's stomach clench. Let me share something I've learned in 2 decades of police work. When someone says they can make things difficult for you, especially when they're standing uninvited on your property, that's not a discussion about property standards. That's intimidation. Derek's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Look, I was just trying to be neighborly. Neighborly would have been introducing yourself properly, maybe bringing the casserole, asking if I needed help with yard work. Marcus's gaze was steady, professional. Neighborly isn't demanding access to someone's property or threatening them with HOA violations. Karen felt heat rising in her cheeks. He wasn't threatening. Mom, just stop, Derek muttered, running a hand through his hair. Chief Washington, I'm sorry. I was out of line. Apology accepted, Marcus said, though his expression remained serious. But this conversation highlights something important. You see, I've been doing my homework since I moved in, talking to neighbors, reading police reports, understanding the community I'm serving. Karen's mouth went dry. Police reports. 3 domestic disturbance calls to this address in the past year, Marcus said matter-of-factly. 2 noise complaints from neighbors about shouting matches. 1 complaint about aggressive HOA enforcement tactics that had Mrs. Henderson in tears. Mrs. Henderson was in violation of the landscaping covenant, Karen said weakly. Mrs. Henderson is 82 years old and on a fixed income, Marcus replied. She was struggling to maintain her garden after her husband's death. The violation was for dandelions in her front yard. Derek stared at his mother. Mom, you didn't tell me about that. It's not personal, Karen said, but she could hear how hollow it sounded. Rules exist for a reason. They protect property values, maintain standards. They protect the community when applied with common sense and compassion, Marcus corrected. When they're used as weapons, they become tools of harassment. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. I have never harassed anyone. Haven't you? Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be notes. 17 violation notices sent to the Martinez family because their children's chalk art was unsightly. 43 citations to Mr. Chen for parking his work truck on his own driveway. A formal complaint to the city about the Johnson family's basketball hoop being too noisy during daylight hours. Each example felt like a weight settling on Karen's chest. I was enforcing the covenants. You were targeting families, Marcus said quietly. Families with children, working families, elderly residents who couldn't fight back. Derek took a step away from his mother. Mom, is this true? Karen's carefully constructed world was crumbling. You don't understand the responsibility I have. That HOA exists, too. To serve the community, Marcus finished. Not to terrorize it. I don't terrorize anyone. Karen's voice rose, desperation creeping in. I maintain standards. I protect property values. You've created an environment where neighbors are afraid to report your son's behavior because they're terrified of retaliation, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Where children can't play outside without fear of violation notices. Where elderly residents cry themselves to sleep because they can't afford to meet your arbitrary standards. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Karen's ragged breathing. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. What happens now? Derek asked quietly. Marcus studied them both for a long moment. Now you both have some serious thinking to do. About what kind of neighbors you want to be. About what kind of community you want to live in. He turned to Karen. I'll be attending the next HOA meeting. I think it's time for some changes.